The government keeps telling you inflation is falling, the Federal Reserve celebrates, the news anchors smile and say the economy is recovering. But when you go to the grocery store, when you pay rent, when you fill up your gas tank, something feels wrong. Everything still costs way more than it used to. And you're not imagining it. Here's the truth they're not telling you. The trick in the numbers. When the government says inflation is falling, they mean the rate of price increases is slowing. But that doesn't mean prices are going down. It means they're still going up, just slower than before. Think of it like this. If prices went up 10% last year and 5% this year, inflation fell from 10 to 5%. Victory, right? But prices are still 15% higher than 2 years ago. Your money still buys 15% less. That's the game. They measure the speed of the increase, not the actual damage already done. The baseline shift. In 2020 and 2021, we saw the biggest inflation spike in 40 years. Prices jumped 20 to 30% on most goods. Food, energy, housing, everything skyrocketed. Now, inflation has fallen to 3 or 4%, but it's 3 or 4% on top of those already inflated prices. The baseline shifted permanently upward, and it's never coming back down. A dozen eggs that cost $2 in 2019 cost $5 today. Even if inflation drops to zero, those eggs aren't going back to $2. The damage is permanent. What they're actually measuring. The Consumer Price Index is the government's main inflation measure. But here's what most people don't know. They change how they calculate it to make inflation look lower. Substitution bias. If steak gets too expensive, they assume you'll buy chicken instead. So they measure chicken prices, not steak. You wanted steak, but the index pretends you're fine with chicken. Inflation looks lower, but your actual standard of living dropped. Hedonic adjustments. If a phone costs more but has a better camera, they adjust the price down because you're getting more value. Never mind that you still paid more dollars. On paper, inflation is lower. In your bank account, you spent more. Shrinkflation ignored. Your cereal box is 20% smaller but costs the same price. That's a 20% price increase. But the CPI doesn't fully capture it because the listed price didn't change. You're getting less for the same money, but inflation statistics miss it. Where you feel it most. Groceries. The average American family is spending $200 more per month on groceries than in 2019. That's $2,400 per year. Eggs, milk, bread, meat, all dramatically higher. The government says food inflation is 4%, but that's 4% from already elevated prices. And it doesn't account for the cheaper quality, smaller packages, and substitutions you're forced to make. Housing. Rent is up 30 to 40% in most major cities since 2020. Mortgage payments doubled because home prices rose and interest rates tripled. The government says housing inflation is cooling. But nobody who actually pays rent or a mortgage believes that. You're paying drastically more than 3 years ago, and that's never reversing. Energy. Gas prices fell from their peak of $5 per gallon. The government celebrated falling inflation, but gas is still $1.50 more per gallon than in 2019. You're spending hundreds more per year, but they call it a victory because it's not as bad as the worst moment. Insurance. Car insurance up 30%. Health insurance up 25%. Home insurance up 40% in some states. These increases are permanent additions to your monthly expenses. The wage illusion. They'll tell you wages are rising too, so it balances out. But here's the reality. Wages went up 10 to 15% for most workers since 2020. Prices went up 25 to 30%. You got a raise, but you're still behind. Your paycheck number is bigger, but your purchasing power is smaller. You're working the same hours, earning more dollars, but able to afford less. And if you're on a fixed income, retirement savings, or invested conservatively, you didn't even get the wage increase. You just absorbed the full price spike with no offset. Why it won't go back down. Deflation, actual falling prices, almost never happens outside of severe recessions or depressions. And the government will do everything possible to avoid deflation because it makes debt harder to repay. America owes $36 trillion. Inflation helps the government by making that debt worth less over time. Deflation would make the debt crisis worse. So they'll keep prices elevated and call slowing inflation a success. Companies won't lower prices voluntarily either. Once they know customers will pay $5 for eggs, why go back to $2? Once rent is $3,000 per month, why drop it to $2,000? Prices are sticky upward. They jump fast but fall incredibly slowly, if at all. The real inflation rate. If we measured inflation the same way we did in the 1980s, the current rate would be closer to 10 to 12%, not 3 to 4%. The methodology changed specifically to make numbers look better. Shadow Stats and other independent economists track inflation using old methods. Their numbers match what you feel in your daily life. Prices are genuinely much higher, and real inflation never fell as much as the government claims. What this means for you. You're not crazy for feeling like everything costs way more. It does. The fact that the rate of increase slowed doesn't help you when you're starting from prices that already doubled. Your savings lost 20 to 30% of purchasing power in 3 years. Even in a high-yield savings account earning 4%, you're losing ground to real inflation. Your salary might have increased, but unless it went up 30%, you're earning less in real terms than you were in 2019. The bottom line. When they say inflation is falling, they mean prices are rising slower. Not falling, not stable. Still rising, just not as catastrophically as before. The baseline shifted, prices jumped 20 to 30%, and they're staying there. A slower rate of increase on top of already inflated prices doesn't help anyone who has to actually buy things. You feel poor because you are poor. Your dollars buy less. Your savings are worth less. Your paycheck doesn't stretch as far. And all the government statistics in the world won't change the reality you see at the checkout counter. They can manipulate how they measure it. They can celebrate slowing rates. They can tell you the economy is recovering. But they can't change the fact that your cost of living permanently increased and your purchasing power permanently decreased. That's why prices still feel high, because they are high, and they're staying high. The inflation crisis didn't end, it just stopped accelerating. And for everyone living in the real economy, that's not nearly good enough.